there are a lot of creationists out there, and they're not necessarily organized. It's not monolithic. There's not a unified front. That said, there's still a lot of them. And they're often influential through various kinds of groups with larger agendas. Campus Crusade for Christ, for example, often promotes creationism at the national level and through various chapters. And although there aren't, you don't see lockstep hordes of creationists descending, nonetheless, there's some, how shall I say, nexuses of consultation obviously going on behind the scenes, since they perversely refuse to copy me on their email. I don't send them my email there.
I wonder if you could say a little bit about the Ben Stein movie. I was in the, it's been a while now since it came out, and the impression I get is that it really was it was a real flop for the anti-abolitionist crowd. Is that your impression also?
Yeah. Well, let me back up for those of you who have the pleasure of not having heard about this. So there's a film called Expelled, which alleges that the proponents of intelligent design have been systematically discriminated against and punished, and also alleges in passing that evolution is scientifically bankrupt and responsible for the Holocaust and stomps on puppies and this is my bread and butter. I see this every day. What's different is that they actually made a movie that got major release out of it, and they got a well-known person, namely the actor and pundit Ben Stein, to front it. So this comes out in 2008 in over 1,000 theaters across the country. I might add that Creation, the new documentary drama about Darwin and his wife, came out in 7 theaters nationally, although it's spread out a little since then. And there were even some creationists who felt that Expelled was over the top. So it seems to have largely been a flash in the pan, I'm glad to say. It clearly must have lost money for the producers. It is going to be shown in church basements around the country from now to kingdom come. NCSC was fairly active in countering this. We put a lot, as with Kitzmiller, we put a lot of effort into assembling a response, and you can find that at expelledexposed.com, where you can find out more about what's wrong with that movie than you ever wanted to know. In some ways, I think it has damaged the credibility of intelligent design overall. For one example, last year it was announced that the University of Vermont was going to award an honorary degree to Ben Stein. This was apparently largely because Stein had given a talk there a couple of years ago that had been well received, and also the president of the University of Vermont's, is one of the sketches. His wife was roommates with the brother of. Okay, well, when that became clear, the biology department at the University of Vermont was extremely unhappy, because after all, Stein had been going around saying that evolution is a vicious dogma responsible for the Holocaust. And this got national attention. Richard Dawkins wrote a very nice letter to the president of the university saying, have you seen this film? Apparently the university said, we have this problem, and Stein, as the university reports it, Stein graciously agreed not to accept the invitation, and according to Stein, he called him chicken shit. So, whatever. But obviously, that was kind of a blow to Stein, and the fact that the University of Vermont realized that it shouldn't be associated with repulsive propaganda like Stein was kind of a nice sign. Yes?
Yeah, do you foresee another Supreme Court case on the horizon? Maybe at the level of Edwards versus Aguilar? Testing ID?
It's possible. What you need is testing ID is going to be interesting, because what you would need is a school board that was, hadn't been paying attention, that was really stubborn. In the case of Kitzmiller, the school board was on the hook for $1,011,000. That's $1 each of the plaintiffs, and another $1 million. It would have been more. It would have been like 2.5 million or so, but the plaintiffs were pretty generous about being argued down. That's a lot of money. And most school board members really just want to do their job, which is keep the roof on the school and keep the buses running, and so forth. So you need a really doctrinaire school board and one that was blind to the lessons of Kitzmiller. What is more likely than a Supreme Court decision about intelligent design, I think, is going to be a Supreme Court decision about these fallback strategies of impugning evolution while being silent about the preferred creationist alternative. Now, these strategies go back a long time. The California Board of Education adopted a policy that evolution be presented as a theory, not fact, in 1924. But given that explicit advocacy of creationism, whether creation science or intelligent design, just is not going to work, we're going to see more and more of this kind of sneaky tactic. And the case law is not as clear. There are a couple of cases on point. Kitzmiller versus Dover actually does have stuff in the decision about theory, not fact. There was another case in Georgia, Cobb County, Southern Cobb County, which involved a textbook disclaimer that didn't mention God, didn't mention the Bible, didn't mention creationism, didn't mention intelligent design. That was kind of a complicated case. The trial court found that this sticker was nonetheless unconstitutional. That decision was appealed. The appeals court said that the evidence was not clear, and they remanded the case back to the trial court. What happened then is Kitzmiller had been decided. So the plaintiffs in that case, who had been challenging the constitutionality of this evolution disclaimer sticker, got a couple of the Kitzmiller lawyers and experts on board, and then because they're going to retrial, and then went and made a settlement offer, and that case was settled on terms highly advantageous to the plaintiffs, but we don't have like a really solid precedent to build on from there. So that should be interesting. Maybe we'll in 12 years. Yes.
One of the recent creationist phenomena is the Creationist Museum, especially in Kentucky, but there's also one in San Diego, Texas, wonderful one. Does NCSC have any thoughts on these museums? It seems like they are some of the separate organizations that keep whatever they want. There's no constitutional issue involved.
Yeah, well, creationist museums are private organizations, and we should also note that creationism is often taught in private Christian schools, not in Catholic and Episcopal and Lutheran schools generally, but in fundamentalist Christian schools. It's also taught in Bible colleges, for example, and you know, in a democratic society, I think we need to be okay with that. There's no constitutional violation to, you know, teaching bad science for religious reasons. Certainly, there are places where there's going to be friction. There was a case recently where a number of students at a Christian school, plus the Association of Christian Schools International, sued the University of California system over its admission requirements, because the University of California had been disqualifying some high school courses as not adequate preparation for college. Included among these were biology classes that used some creationist textbooks. And the University of California system has won that case and again on appeal, so it looks like we're holding the line there. But certainly when people are teaching creationism privately, also goes on homeschools all the time, I think we just need to live with that and just keep on educating people about evolution. Yes, sir.
It does seem like Europe is becoming increasingly secular. In America, are countries that are scientifically literate will succeed and those who are not scientifically literate can fail states? Due to that competition, so economic success, do you think that will force creationism to become retired in the graveyard of bad ideas?
One would like to think so. And evolution is economically important. This is something that we do well to realize. Applications in medicine and biotechnology, practically by definition. When you think about the broader creationist assault on science, like a young Earth creationist now, consider petroleum geology. Is this a good field for young Earth creationists? Apparently not. There's a geologist who had a degree from Institute for Creation Research, went into petroleum geology, found that what he had learned was completely useless and that he had to go by mainstream geology to get his job done. He talked to his fellow colleagues who were graduates of the SR graduate school. They all felt the same way, and there was widespread fall away from the Earth creationists by people who actually had to use geology on the job. Yes, sir.
There was a creationist who was trying to get investors for a petroleum company for his theory that Israel was floating atop an ocean of undiscovered oil, and it was being promoted on Christian radio. I can't remember his name right now, but it was a couple of years ago. They were making a lot of noise on it on one of the Sacramento Christian stations.
Wow.
I guess it hasn't paid off.
If you remember the details, I'd be very interested in.
I had heard that the park rangers in the Grand Canyon were prohibited from telling the age of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, that's
what was the status of that?
that's false. So what happened? There is a group called Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, which is generally a good group and did a lot of work against Bush-era assaults on the scientific integrity of the National Park Services and other things. But they put this false claim in a press release. It was false, then it retracted. That said, there have been problems at the NPS. The big one basically involves the presence of a young Earth creationist coffee table book about the Grand Canyon, beautiful photographs, that was being sold at the bookstores in the Grand Canyon. Now you might think, well, wait a minute, the government doesn't own those bookstores. And it doesn't. Something called the Grand Canyon Association owns those bookstores. But it does become a problem because those bookstores and their inventory is overseen and approved by the National Park Service. And so, that kind of removes it from its private and creationists that can do what they want, even if we don't have to like it, to we have a serious problem of government endorsement of creationism. So that situation never really got straightened out very nicely. A lot of people protested, including the presidents of something like 8 professional geoscience societies. The buck kept on getting handed off to different people in the NPS, and really there was never any clear explanation of why those books were let in when they clearly didn't pass the criteria for scientific accuracy generally expected of books being sold in the Grand bookstores. So I don't really have a happy ending to report there. I do not presently know whether they're being sold. Yes.
Can you comment on California textbooks and their quality in this area?
Yeah. Well, everyone always complains about textbooks, and there's plenty to complain about. The general trend over the last few years has been improvement in the accuracy of the treatment of evolution textbooks. It's still not all it could be. The treatment generally needs to be deeper, it needs to be more pervasive, it needs to be more up-to-date and more exciting. California, in the early 90s, had some big fights over textbooks. Recently, we haven't really had those fights, which is good. California is one of the big textbook markets in the United States, although Texas may be bigger. And I believe that due to budget reasons, California is not doing textbook approval in the immediate future, so we're not going to fight. Texas is where you really have more of a problem. You have a 15-person school board there, which is elected, of whom 7 are creationists, with maybe 1 swing vote and a number of people who, though not creationists, are, shall we say, too easily swayed. So Texas recently did a hatchet job on its state's science standards. And you have to wonder, here you are, you're State Board of Education, you've got a Department of Education. The Department of Education goes out and recruits teachers and scientists to spend time devising a set of state science standards, which are basically guidelines. It's not as detailed as a curriculum or a lesson plan. These are guidelines about what students ought to learn. without exactly explaining how they learn them. So you have all these experts in science, experts on pedagogy, developing the standards in a collaborative process over the course of months. And then you give them to a board of education led by a creationist dentist, and you just let them rewrite them ad lib without any consultation and enshrine them as part of your state's administrative apparatus. They're going to, eventually, they're not going to be able to get anybody to write the standards if that's the way they're going to treat them.
Welcome to Alice in Wonderland.
Yes?
What about in the classroom? I can't recall a single time that anybody walked into the classroom and actually regulated what the teacher was saying. I mean, I know there's curriculum, but what's going on to ensure that the teachers who are teaching these things are actually teaching?
Well, that's where you have the extreme decentralization of American education at play. Even if you have evolution front and center in your state's science standards, still, when the classroom door closes, it's basically up to the teacher whether evolution is taught or how. Now, there are increasingly some more constraints on this. One is, interestingly, thanks to President Bush, who enacted, signed into law, No Child Left Behind in 2002. What this does is set up it basically requires states to have state science standards and to have high-stakes testing. Now, state science standards started emerging in, say, the early 90s, but No Child Left Behind really cemented their importance. So what happens now is if you have evolution in the standards, then you're going to have evolution in the state testing. If you have it in the state testing, you're going to have it in the classroom, because otherwise your students aren't going to do as well, and there are going to be consequences for your school. Is it any wonder that some of the nastiest fights we've had over evolution education in the last decade have been over the place of evolution in state science standards? Creationists understand these connections too, and that's why we have had big fights in Kansas and Texas and Ohio and New Mexico and West Virginia over the place of evolution in state science standards. When you get a competent group of scientists and educators to write a list of things that students need to know and be able to do, you'll have evolution in there. But if you have politicians in the mix, especially ones with creationist constituencies, then you have trouble. So generally, when a new law comes across my desk, and we went to evolution law, my reaction is, oh, new law, that's exciting. But when a new standards fight comes up, I say, okay, all hands on deck, because that's going to be more of a fight. A lot of creationist legislation is really, I think, introduced to score points with constituents and not in the serious expectation that it's going to pass. The fights over standards are really serious. I should say, having deprecated the importance of fights over legislation, that we did have that creationist bill passed in Louisiana in 2008. So they're not all duds, but most of them are. Someone always asks about the creationism around the world, and I'm surprised. Okay.
So has Obama reversed a lot of Bush's damage on evolution? Or?
You know, the federal government has basically almost nothing to do with curriculum and instruction. So he's not really in a position to do anything even if he wanted to. He can use his position as the bully pulpit. President Bush expressed support, or at any rate seemed to, for teaching intelligence design in August 1st, 2005. This is something that sticks by memory because two of my colleagues, including my boss, Julie Scott, were at the bottom of the Grand Canyon at the time, and the phone is ringing off the hook. So that was kind of a busy day for us. So as for the National Park System, I think he's had other things on his plate. Yes?
I suppose this relates to creationism around the world, but what I really want to know is, are Catholics in the United States at all involved in the creationism?
Yes, on both sides. For example, Michael Behe, who is the Lehigh University biochemistry professor and author of Darwin's Black Box and the Edge of Evolution, who among intelligent design creationists is probably the one with the best scientific credentials, is a practicing Catholic.
That really surprises me.
On the other hand, The cell biologist Ken Miller at Brown University, author of Finding Darwin's God and Only a Theory, was one of Behe's fiercest critics, is the co-author of one of the most widely used biology textbooks in the United States, which has a pretty good treatment of evolution, and who testified for the plaintiffs in the Kitzbühel trial, is a practicing Catholic.
Well, the reason I ask about this is that creationism, at least as it comes out of fundamentalism, is about this sort of literal interpretation of the Bible. And the Catholic exegetical tradition has never been interpreted.
So
It wouldn't suit their power structure. If they had to interpret it literally, they'd be in trouble.
well, but keep in mind that American Catholics are, to a large degree, kind of independent of the traditional power structure. And you can find Catholics with you can't think of any flat earthers offhand, but there certainly are geocentric Catholics out there. There's also is it in France? No. There are also creationist organizations basically in the Catholic tradition, the Kolbe Center as well. And even in the church hierarchy. In 2005, the Cardinal Archbishop of Vienna, Christoph Schoenberg, published this op-ed in the New York Times that seemed to be expressing support for intelligent design. I told a reporter from the Times, how did the Discovery Institute talking points make their way to Vienna? Fair question. Schoenberg later had backed off of this for that, but it turned out that the publication of that op-ed had been brokered by a Catholic named Mark Ryland, who at the time was vice president of the Discovery Institute. So, there are reasons, and I hope to have brought them out to some degree, why creationism can be motivated by theological concerns that aren't strictly from biblical literalism. And presumably, for most Catholic creationists, it comes out of a kind of more generalized sense of unease with what evolution tells us about human beings as a natural species, than by any adherence to a particular rule of the Bible.
To what degree do you think that the guy who's head of the Genome Project, with his religious stances, have adversely affected the United States?
This is Francis Collins. He was co-led the Human Genome Project. He was on the government side, or Inventor did the rest. And he's currently director of the National Institutes of Health. So, he accepts evolution, makes no bones about it, and has actually, done something in defense of it. And he's a good scientist. He has, sincere and deep evangelical religious beliefs. These do not seem to have played any role in his science. He's a good scientist. So, I don't really have no concerns about him. Yes?
It seems like most of this controversy centers around the lower levels of education, textbooks in junior high school and high school probably. Do they do anything at the university level, and are they trying to affect research or anything?
It's mainly at the high school level because it's at high school that evolution is usually first introduced full on. Ideally, you plant the ideas of adaptation and natural selection things early, and then you build on them and give evolution full on in high school. But yes, we do have various kinds of controversies at the university level. What we don't have is this kind of continual problem with teachers being set upon to teach creationism, because university instructors are not as susceptible to the kind of pressures from locals, parents, teachers, administrators, that their counterparts at the kindergarten through 12 level are. Community colleges actually are an intermediate case, and I think community college professors seem to report more problems than university professors. So you will have various problems. You have creationist students being annoying in class. You have creationist groups bringing creationists on campus trying to promote debates. You occasionally have creationist faculty. And sometimes that's unproblematic. There's one Southern California university, for example, that has a young earth creationist who's a tenured faculty member. He's an electrical engineer. It probably doesn't matter on a regular basis. You have more problems where you have someone who has been doing, for example, teaching creationism in his university biology classes, There are occasional lawsuits over this. Bishop v. Aronoff from the early 90s is one. And these get resolved in varieties of ways. You typically do not see in a good university, public or private, secular or sectarian, creationism in any flavor being presented in a biology class. The only place that's going to happen is the Bible college. But there's still various ways that creationism can be applied on college campuses. Yeah.
Well, this kind of leads into the last question, but do you want to talk about the recent Ray Comfort incident where he tried to hand out the origin of species with his own 50-page introduction?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to hand it to him. This is clever. So, there's a New Zealand evangelist named Ray Comfort, whose evangelical partner is Kirk Cameron of the Growing Pains sitcom back in the late 80s, early 90s.
This is the big banana guy?
This is the banana guy. So, before this year, what Comfort was really famous for was an internet video arguing that the banana was the atheist nightmare because, after all, look at it, it's curved to fit in your hand, it has the easy top opening, and so forth. Little realizing, of course, that your Cavendish banana, Musa acuminata AAA, is a product of hundreds, probably thousands of years of artificial selection and was not designed initially like that by God or anybody else. So,
not to mention it excludes almost everything else we eat as being something that God must have made.
Yeah, well, it's what I eat. Okay, but Comfort and Cameron developed this rather cynical publicity stunt where what they would do is take the origin of species, which is in the public domain, and hand it out on college campuses for the 150th anniversary of its publication, disfigured with an introduction by Comfort, asterisk, but an introduction by Comfort, basically rubbishing the book and rubbishing Darwin. So the asterisk is because it turned out that he plagiarized a good chunk of that from a hapless biology lecturer named Stan Duffy at the University of Texas Knoxville, who is not happy about it. At NCSC, we heard about this fairly early, I think back in September, and we were kind of puzzling what to do about it. Is this a case where he's just going to get more attention if we pay attention to him? Or on the other hand, should we? So we're mulling that over, and then we start getting emails. Because what Comfort had done is basically taken a list of the top 50 universities according to U.S. News and World Report and said, we're going to be handing these out here. And students of the universities immediately say, oh no. And a lot of them call or email and say, okay, we have to do something about it. Now, this is a little tricky. For example, Richard Dawkins heard about this. He said, well, I think people should just be ripping out the introduction. I was like, yeah. Why don't we just have burn them? Because that'll look really good on camera. That's the kind of reaction that he was hoping to elicit. I said, oh, look at the atheists who are, mutilating books. Next they'll be burning creationists at the stake. Okay, so we didn't want to do that. So we figured, okay, it's got to be humor. So we were still serious about it. And you can find on our special website, Countering the Book, a very detailed refutation of everything that's wrong with the book. We figured no one was going to read that. We just felt obliged to put it up. So we went with humor. The website's called Don't Diss Darwin. We've got a nice little wax steel image of Darwin with a arrow for his head. We even made a little internet video, which to go viral, where we have someone explain that, no, what you don't do is rip the pages out. You put in our bookmark. That's got an arrow. You put it in the right place, and one points to the science, that's the Darwin point, and the other arrow points to the part that's all bananas. There's a big yellow banana on the bookmark. So, and we didn't let him forget about this. Jeannie Scott had a little online debate at a U.S. News and World Report blog with comfort. And her first entry in this said, you know, I'm confident that students will be able to see that Ray Comfort's introduction is just bananas. We too can have our dog whistles. So we did a lot of work helping student organizations coordinate the response. We sent out about 5,000 little bookmarks for people to distribute along with the distribution of the copy of origin disfigured with introduction. Now, Ray Comfort made a little mistake. He thought what would be really clever is to announce that he was going to do it on the 19th and then do the distribution on the 18th, thus catching us by surprise. He had forgotten about the internet. You know, everyone was ready to go on the 19th, but you know, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's email. People got out there on the 18th. Comfort and Cameron themselves made their appearance at UCLA, having said they were going to go to Berkeley, on the 18th to do the distribution. Bad move. That was the day that the UC Regents were meeting to raise tuitions 30%. UCLA students had other things to worry about. So, you know, in the end, I think this was something of a fiasco for Comfort and Cameron. They didn't take a financial loss on it, unfortunately, because generally local evangelical churches were the people who bought and distributed the books. So they may have made some money on it. But a fiasco nonetheless. And certainly they didn't convince anybody. Yes?
So what is the best way to support the National Center for Science Education?
That would be joining. We are a membership organization. We're at $30 a year, which is a pretty good bargain. For those, you know, students, for example, often don't join because they can't afford it, but can keep up with us by way of, for example, you know, you can become a fan of our Facebook page. I think we went over the 5,000 mark recently. The Discovery Institute has, I believe, something like 800 fans. So I would rejoice, except I think Answers in Genesis has about 22,000, so we're not winning. Now, Seamus reminded me, I've got a sign-up sheet in the back there. If you write down your address, we'll send you a packet of information. If you write down your email address, we'll subscribe you to our free weekly e-newsletter. You do both, we'll do both. You can have a YouTube channel and the Twitter, in which we package up the evolution, creationism, controversy in 140-character chunks. People seem to like it. Yes?
Is there a worldwide movement of creationists?
Well, creationism is worldwide. Let me ask. But it's not a unitary monolithic movement. I mean, how could it be? You've got people who, you know, whose estimate of the age of the universe differs by 13 billion years. So you do have creationists in other places. A lot of it is exported from the United States. For example, historically the center of creationism in Australia is Queensland, and that's because that's where most of the United States troops were in World War II, making it a kind of a good environment for creationism. But then it gets re-exported. Answers in Genesis, as I mentioned, is run basically by a cadre of expatriates from New Zealand and Australia, and the Australians are from Queensland. Similarly, there was a kind of kangaroo trial in Topeka, Kansas in 2005, where creationists on the school board were trying to have a stage of creation evolution debate. The scientific community boycotted that, so they just had the creationist side of it. One of the creationists was a fellow from Turkey who had been associated with a well-known Turkish creationist called Harun Yahya, who, as been pointed out, has disseminated his version of Islamic creationism all over the place, including sending people this huge, lavishly produced volume called the Atlas of Creation I've seen 2 volumes, and I hear there's a 3rd one, which I'll be eager to get.
I have that book. It came into a newsroom where I was working as a review copy, and nobody wanted it, so I grabbed it. And what's impressive about it is that the back, not only must it have cost, I mean, each volume had cost hundreds to me. But when you go to the back of it, there's about 20 pages of color photographs of other books published from the same house that are Christian fundamentalists. So there is a clear connection between the Islamic creationists and the Christians there.
Harun Yahya, much is shrouded in mystery. The Turkish creationist movement originally kind of borrowed a lot of its arguments from the Institute for Creation Research, so kind of form of Christian, indeed Protestant, young earth creationism. They left out the bits about the age of the earth and about the worldwide extent of Noah's flood because these don't really chime in the Islamic world. You don't have any word from the Quran or from the Hadith. Then a bit later, Harun Yahya started taking up intelligent design things, using catchphrases like irreducible complexity, citing Michael Behe. And then around 2005, he disavowed intelligent design as being insufficiently Islamic. There's a lot of other weird stuff going on. There seems to be this heavy influence of Berkeley idealism in his writings, which I find completely bizarre. Harun Yahya is probably the pseudonym for a group of authors, but the figurehead of and the person who's usually identified as Harun Yahya is a fellow named Adnan Akhtar, who has been, and I believe is currently in trouble with the Turkish government on various charges, but is not presently incarcerated. Yes?
You talked briefly about college and other aspects. What about the internet? There's this whole Conservapedia thing that got created, and then there was a whole thing with Richard Linsky and his experience on evolution and E. coli and stuff. Are you guys combating that whole side too,
Well,
without censoring?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the internet pretty much shows you that anyone can have a website. So NCC has its own website, and we will confront and debunk information on the internet on kind of on an as-needed basis. Many of you may know the XKCD cartoon where there's someone frantically typing, "Come to bed." "I can't. Someone is wrong on the internet." But we don't have the resources to do that. There are various resources I would recommend that include the Pandas Thumb blog, which is very good and written by a team of people, including Tim Sandler and Chris Rowe. There is many of the blogs on the Science Blogs Network run by Seed Magazine are very good, including P.C. Myers and J.C. Rosenhaus. And individual people have some very good resources. David Vinson on the back here has a very nice website with a lot of information on creation evolution. What's the website, David?
Yeah, what is it?
drvinson.net?
Science.drvinson.net. It's written for evangelicals as a way to let them know that there's a way to take their theology and incorporate evolution within it without violating some of their victims. So to win the enemy over.
So, I mean, there's a lot of good information out there, and a lot of information aimed specifically at combating the bad information out there, which is pretty much the way it should be. Yes?
Have you seen the We Can Find a Million People by June Facebook pages?
Yeah. I don't have anything against it, I just don't really see the problem. I have been thinking about joining the tautology one. We can find a million people before a million people. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't have a concrete effect. What I'd rather see is, for example, how many people know, do you know the people on your local school board? I don't know the people on my local school board, so I shouldn't be saying. Do you know their positions on teaching evolution? Yeah. Do you know that if you have a child, do you know that the teachers at your school are teaching evolution at an age-appropriate level? Yeah. Do they need any resources to help them do that? You maybe want to buy them a book, a subscription to the American biology teacher. There are little things you can do that will actually help the quality of evolution education that mean a little more than joining Facebook. Yes?
Do you do any collaboration with other organizations like Michael Schremer's eSkeptic?
NCSE is eager and willing to work with other people because that's just so much more work we don't have to do. We do a lot of work in collaboration. We haven't really done much with the eSkeptic thing as such, although I think I actually had a book review on it earlier this year.
Good book.
We're on good terms with Schirmer, and he's published stuff of ours. If he's speaking on evolution, we'll email our members and let him know. The groups we work with extensively are civil liberties groups like ACLU and Americans United. We work extensively with educational groups, obviously, like National Association of Biology Teachers, National Science Teachers Association. We work with the scientific groups. I don't know how many scientists we have here. One thing we're really trying to get scientists to do. Look, suppose, you're a member of the American Psychoceramic Society, and you're having your annual meeting in Butte, Montana, and you've got the world's experts there. Well, heck, why don't, as long as you got them there, why don't we have a workshop for the local teachers? A few years ago, in collaboration with some other organizations, we developed a kind of blueprint for doing this. A lot of scientific societies have started doing it. And, it makes sense. You want to support evolution education? Hey, as long as you're out in the sticks at your conference, why don't you help the local teachers? That's just one example of a kind of collaborative effort that can really pay off well for the benefit of evolution education.
What you're saying, it sounds like the problems are now expanding out of biology classroom now, coming, places where they teach cosmology and physics.
No, it's been going there. For short, we talk about defending the teaching of evolution, but really we have to introduce the premises and related concepts. So, we've had objections to, for example, Big Bang cosmology being mentioned. There was one school district in Kentucky that glued pages of the textbook together to avoid it. Early 90s. Any area of science that's going to step on a particular set of religious toes is going to be under threat. So, not just biology. Yes?
Have you ever thought about giving them what they want in order to kind of have creation taught, but, fill in all the blanks about it, show that it's not science, so that it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, this gets periodically proposed. So one thing we have to bear in mind is that creationism is not something from which science teachers are automatically immune. There was a recent national study conducted by researchers at Penn State that suggests about 1 in 8 high school biology teachers in the United States in their classrooms suggest that creationism is scientifically credible. 1 in 8. So if you have a general policy telling teachers, hey, go ahead and talk about creationism, just make sure that you explain that it's bunk, you've got 1 in 8 that are possibly not going to do that.
I see.
Moreover, you have many teachers who are properly reluctant to impugn their students' religious beliefs. A teacher in public school's job is not to change their students' religious beliefs. Maybe what they teach will do so, but that's not what they're supposed to be trying to do. So if your student is a creationist, you say, well, creationism is bunk and so is your religion, and your mama dresses you funny, this is not conducive to a good learning experience. So there are certainly cases where teachers have effectively debunked creationism as part of a learning exercise. But not every teacher can be trusted to do it, not everyone will be willing to do it, and generally they're not going to be trained to do it. So as a kind of general suggestion.
The corollary to that, though, is are there any electives right now for that? So that it's not taught next to science, but it's taught as an elective, or this is, Muslim tradition, Jewish tradition, Christian tradition.
That's a proposal that's very frequently surfaces. People say, no, we're not going to teach intelligent design as science, but maybe we can discuss it. In part of a science class, in part of a social studies class, comparative religion class. You know, this is not necessarily objectionable. There are ways in which it can be abused, as Bible, as literature classes can be abused, but it's not necessarily a problem. It's when creationism is being presented as scientifically credible that the problem.
Well, then the leading problem being that it's illegal. If you were to try to teach both sides of creationism, even if you did so conscientiously in the biology class, it's almost certain that you violate the First Amendment one way or another. I mean, because if you're spending taxpayer dollars to promote creationism, it's violation of the First Amendment. The other comment with relation to the previous question, I wonder if this has happened already, but if it hasn't, I think it's only a matter of time before we see an effort to teach Mormon history. For example, to argue that there were chariot battles in the New World in prehistorical times and things like that. I mean, if it's going to be done in science classes, I wonder if it's only a matter of time.
Since the science is concerned, I wouldn't know necessarily. I'd be surprised if it hasn't popped up somewhere in Utah or Arizona. Yes.
Probably a comment, but I think that there's so little time for science to be taught in schools in the first place that I wouldn't give an ounce of time to discussing something as, frankly, I think as bullshit as creationism, because there's so little time for science as it is. And so it seems like kind of a dangerous thing to start trying to bring in a debate about something that we don't really have any evidence for into the classroom when there really isn't enough time to talk about real science.
Yeah, that's I think a fair point to make about including a discussion of it in science classes. Sometimes you'll see in curricula or occasionally in textbook some discussion of what view was historically important when Darwin was developing his theory, which kind of makes sense. More often, I think, contemporary discussions would come up in a current events class or something like that.